Most Americans have little idea of where their water comes from, where their water goes, and so we knew that one of the difficulties in getting involved in this whole issue was that while New Yorkers loved their city drinking water, they were not particularly knowledgeable about the sources of that water and what was necessary to ensure that it remained of high quality for future generations.
The Safe Drinking Water Act was signed in 1974, and what that did was provide a federal framework nationally for setting forth federal regulations and drinking water standards that would be set across the board for all states. Later on, in 1989, the Surface Water Treatment Rule was signed, and what that did was essentially mandate filtration for drinking water supplies. So the city coming in and asking for a waiver was something that really EPA was not entirely comfortable with from the very get-go.
It's clear that DEP did not know what to do. But they weren't panicked because basically there was this kind of belief that, well, we're so big, we're so important, that somehow we'll get away with it.
The thought of having to make the small homeowners in New York City, as well as other property owners, assume the cost for an $8 billion plant was not something I wanted to see.
All New Yorkers ought to be entitled to breathe clean air and drink clean water and have appropriate green places to play and recreate and have communities that they can raise their families in. So threats to New York City's tap water really threaten a cornerstone human right.
I grew up listening to my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles about what the city did when they built the Propacton reservoirs, going in and removing people's homes and taking people out of their homes.
My husband cut logs, and my uncle, he sawed the logs out, and they built the garage. And then we built on the back 3 rooms, a big bedroom, a kitchen, and a living room. Here's where we got kicked out of.
And if they wanted to put a big sign up on the tree in front of your house and say you've got to be out of here in 30 days, they just did that and left.
In today's world, people wouldn't stand for it. We got a different society altogether. But in those times, people, hey, government wants us to do this, we have to do it.
I'll tell you that bitterness with some people will never leave as long as they live. And not only bitterness, but their hearts were broken.
New York City's supply was quite unusual in the scheme of water supplies because not only was it gravity-fed, but it was unfiltered. It was untreated.
The water coming out of the reservoirs was still of high enough safety so that if we were to preserve what we had, we would still be able to have tap water that met national health standards, and one could avoid the massive costs of filtration.
So we knew that we had to write a series of regulations that would restore the city's credibility as a watershed regulator.
These regulations were, a pretty stringent set of regulations. They had a strict focus on acquiring land with targets being set by the city, and clearly that set the stage for a contentious round of discussions with the communities as well as New York State.
Those of us here in the watershed were convinced they were coming back in with typical police powers and eminent domain in order to protect their water supply. It was just a time of, you were scared. You just didn't know what was going to happen, and of course it was your livelihood and your roots. And so it was a very difficult time for us.